It is no secret that our American society is divided. To a large degree, it is tribal, it is toxic, and it is regressing. We are losing our moral compass, and we seem to be blind to it. I believe that's in large part due to the fact that we're getting dumber by the minute, fueled by a system we created. But I believe there is a way out. It might not be too late to turn the ship around, but to do so, we need to collectively agree on a moral framework that secures our individual rights, our liberty, our prosperity, and our pursuit of happiness. And to do that, I believe we need to dive deeper into the root cause of our problems, objectively and unapologetically. I have been making the case that morality, knowing the difference between right and wrong, requires an ability to reason and employ critical thinking. Today, however, the ability to apply reasoning and critical thinking is deteriorating. Our intelligence, for the first time since we began measuring it, is declining. And I'm asserting that it is because our system is producing American idiots. So we have a problem. How are we going to intellectually and morally evolve if our people are too dumb to self-correct? I will also assert that our system has created by far the most ignorant American society in modern times. And because we live in a democracy, so to speak, what happens when the majority of citizens are comprised of ignorant, dumb, lazy people who are allowed to vote? We are in trouble. How bad is this problem? Well, to fully appreciate the magnitude of this problem, we're going to need to have the courage to tackle areas considered to be taboo. Fair warning, this is going to be controversial when we cover it, but I don't care. The facts are the facts. And as I've stated over and over, before we find solutions that will work, we need to understand reality, we need to understand human nature, and we need to call a spade a spade. So if reality triggers you, go ahead and check out now. There's plenty of stupidity and feel-good garbage on TikTok and other social media. But if you want to learn, challenge yourself intellectually, then listen to what I have to say. If you disagree, challenge me. I welcome it. All you need to do is bring fact and logic, reality and reason. And with that, let's get started. Ever get into it with someone who's dead wrong but acts like they know the real truth? You're in a conversation and the other person is flat out wrong. They have no facts, no real experience, no solid logic, yet they speak with absolute, unshakable confidence. It's baffling. How can they be so clueless and so confident at the same time? Well, we can find part of the answer in something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, the idea that the dumbest people have no idea how dumb they really are. It is a statistical and scientific phenomenon. Their ignorance is so profuse they can't even see it. But sadly, it's not mysterious. It's baked into how too many minds work when knowledge is thin. When somebody is confidently ignorant, the less they actually know about a domain, the less they even suspect the depths they're missing. We see this constantly in everyday life. Some woman listens to a pop psychology podcast on attachment styles, and next thing you know, she's diagnosing her coworkers and exes with clinical certainty. Surface-level familiarity gets mistaken for deep understanding. Way before the Dunning-Kruger studies, about 200 years ago, a German philosopher, Schopenhauer, called this the illusion of comprehension. You recognize the words, so you think you own the ideas. You recognize words like systematic, trauma, equity, dopamine hack, so your brain tells you that you own the idea. But this is only an illusion of understanding. Can you break it down into first principles? Defend it when the sharp cynic pushes back hard. Teach it so clearly that even a skeptical 17-year-old gets it? Most people preaching online or at parties fail that test miserably. They're pushing slogans. They're not wielding knowledge. Schopenhauer said something like, write for idiots and you'll always have a packed house. Because idiots can't tell shallow fluff from depth. Simple sounds true to them. They don't know or can't know any better. Look, as you know by listening to the series, it's not in my nature to sugarcoat things. We need to acknowledge that not all people are born equal. Though we may be entitled to equal natural rights, we may have the same moral rights and justification to defend ourselves. We are most definitely not born with equal intelligence, equal personality predispositions, or into equal environments. Regardless of what some progressive and liberal academia would have you believe, we are not born with a clean slate. Biological differences and inheritable characteristics are not a social construct. Some people are just born with low IQs and lack the ability to think critically. For example, if we look at IQ differences by race, we find that certain Jews dominate with an average IQ of 108, followed by Eastern Asians with an average IQ of 105. Of course, white Americans of European descent average 100. I'll explain why later. And then there's a pretty big drop-off to Hispanic Americans who average about 90 IQ, followed by Black Americans of African descent with an average IQ of 85. Internationally, strictly judging by IQ, coming at the bottom, the dumbest of the dumb are the Muslim-majority countries with an average IQ of 81. And even though this is pretty well studied and documented, progressives and political liberals often deny this reality. This denial is often driven by fear. They worry that emphasizing innate differences in intelligence, personality, and behavior could be used to justify inequality, discrimination, racism, sexism, or even class hierarchy. But fear does not change the facts, doesn't change the reality. One of the biggest intellectual train wrecks of the last 50 years is the confusion between scientific classification and social construction. Look, humans create categories all the time. We invent words, labels, taxonomies, and definitions to describe reality. That's what science does. Biologists classify species. Chemists classify elements. Psychologists classify personality traits. The fact that humans created a classification system doesn't mean we created the underlying reality. Somewhere along the way, progressives started blurring the lines between these two categories, treating objective scientific classifications as if they were mere social constructs. They were taught that race is a social construct or gender is a social construct, and concluded that if a category was created by humans, then the thing being described must not be real at all. One of the best examples of the difference between scientific classification and social constructionism is intelligence and IQ. Now, IQ tests are absolutely a human invention. We create the questions, we create the scoring system, we create the term IQ. In that sense, IQ is a social construct, just like inches, pounds, and degrees Fahrenheit are social constructs. But that doesn't mean the underlying phenomenon we're measuring is imaginary. IQ works similarly. Scientists didn't create human differences in reasoning ability, pattern recognition, working memory, processing speed, or abstract thinking. Those differences existed long before psychologists came along. What psychometrics did was create a standardized way to classify and measure them. But again, somewhere along the way, some people began conflating the measurement system with the thing being measured. And now someone hears IQ is a social construct and conclude that intelligence itself is merely a social invention, a cultural preference, or political label. But that's not how science works. Scientific classification is our attempt to organize and describe patterns that exist in a world. Strong social constructionism would like you to believe that because humans created the categories, humans created the reality itself. And these progressives, these political liberals, absolutely seek the power to control the narrative, to shame people for not aligning to their narratives, to force people to use certain language and assert certain ideologies. For them, the power to redefine reality is based on who controls the narrative. Classification is not a construct. It is a categorization based on empirical evidence, and IQ is no different. The SAT is a human invention. The thermometer is a human invention. The stopwatch is a human invention. Yet athletic ability, temperature, and cognitive ability exist independently of the tools we use to measure them. And that's where a lot of modern debates go off the rails. People stop arguing about what's true in the world and start arguing about the labels we use to describe it, mistaking the filing cabinet for the contents of the files. These liberal and progressive self-declared academics would like you to believe that the scientific knowledge itself is socially constructed, that intelligence tests largely measure social privilege rather than cognitive ability, that race is entirely a social construct with no biological relevance. And yet this academic garbage is being taught in academia and universities in many humanity and social science disciplines, such as gender studies, queer theory, critical theory, cultural studies, some subfields of sociology, and the scariest discipline, degrees in education. And they're being taught in many major universities: Harvard University, Yale, University of Michigan, University of California, Berkeley, and Santa Cruz. How is that possible? We'll get to that in time. Right now, let me just give you another area where progressives are blurring the lines between these two categories, and that is treating objective biological classifications as if they were mere social constructs. They profess that gender is primarily a social performance rather than an innate characteristic, that sex categories themselves are social constructions. It's hard for me to understand how someone could buy into this nonsense. It violates basic principles in behavioral genetics, evolutionary psychology, neuroscience, and developmental psychology. Yet, you'll find in progressive academia, invoking social constructs means reality can be rewritten if enough people pretend to agree. But reality doesn't work that way. There are some things that are just rooted in objective reality, and people's inability to distinguish between classifications and social constructs does not change that reality. Again, classifications are a system of organization based on observable characteristics that can be measured, verified. Biology classifies organisms by sex, by species, reproductive systems, genetic markers. These classifications aren't arbitrary. They're based on objective, measurable criteria. In humans, male and females are classifications grounded in reproductive biology. Males produce sperm, females produce eggs. The binary framework isn't a social invention. It's mammalian biology. This should not be confused with social constructs. Social constructs are human-made systems of meaning and organization. Social constructs can be reshaped, redefined, and dismantled based on collective agreement. So, for example, pink is strongly associated with girls and femininity, blue with boys and masculinity. Parents dress baby girls in pink outfits, decorate their nurseries pink, and society reinforces this through marketing, toys, and social expectations. This is a social construct. Now, you want to mess up your boy? Send him to school in a pink dress and see if he's not traumatized or gets his ass kicked. But when they make the claim that biological sex is a social construct, they're attempting to dissolve the factual basis of male and female into the fluidity of gender identity. It's absurd. So next time some cupcake tells you that biological sex is a social construct, ask him this. Is gravity a social construct? Is the periodic table a social construct? Is the difference between a shark and a dolphin a social construct? Good Lord, where's the common sense? Now, why does this matter? Because when everything is treated as a construct, nothing is grounded. Truth becomes subjective. Science becomes negotiable. And objective reality just becomes another opinion. If we can't distinguish between what's a social construct and what is a biological classification, we lose our ability to make rational, evidence-based decisions in medicine, law, sports, policy, and so forth. The real danger of conflating social construct with biological classifications is that it opens up the door to endless manipulation. If reality itself can be redefined at will, then any lie can be repackaged as my truth. And when the truth is up for grabs, the only thing left is power. The power of who controls the narrative. And conflating these two isn't progressive, it's regressive. It's moronic, really, because if you can't tell the difference between reality and a story, you're not enlightened. You're lost. You're delusional. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect at work. The dumber you are, the more likely you are susceptible to this indoctrination and brainwashing. And the most frustrating part, you usually can't correct these people. You can't fix an idiot. And I don't think it's because they're stubborn. It's because they literally don't have the mental hardware to process being wrong. They can't even see the gap between their beliefs and reality. So every correction just sounds like a different opinion. Evidence gets dismissed, science disregarded, sources attacked, logic ignored. It's like trying to fax something to a guy who has no fax machine. For the younger generation, I'll use a different analogy. It's like trying to send a text to a landline. It's like trying to install software on hardware that can't run it. It's like trying to stream Netflix on a toaster. These people are living in a closed loop. Ignorance blocks evidence, and the lack of evidence protects their ignorance. This phenomenon also seems to reflect social media arguments in a nutshell. You bring facts, they bring feelings and repetition. You point out the fallacy, they don't even know what a fallacy is. Scroll any contentious comment section and you'll see it in real time. And to add insult to injury, based on the 2024 Penn State study analyzing 35 million news links shared on Facebook, they found that more than 75% were shared without the user even clicking through to read the content. Today's social justice warriors rely on headlines and short descriptions. 75%. How much you want to bet these people have subscriptions to The Guardian or CNN or the New York Times? Now, to be clear, I don't have any data supporting that speculation, but if I were a gambling man, I'd wager that the large majority of these people who do not read the article before forwarding it are liberals. And statistically, among those who do read actual articles, the majority of them probably lack the critical thinking and depth to challenge what they're reading when they read articles from these sources. The desire to always be right is a deal some people make with themselves to stay stupid forever. The end result is a fortress of confident bullshit built on a foundation of ignorance. What makes this even more challenging is that these people who can't differentiate between science and activist propaganda are often swayed by those who they believe sound intelligent. Because not all idiots sound like AOC, Jasmine Crockett, or the ladies of The View. Some idiots don't do simple. Some professors and politicians use complexity as camouflage. They mask their ignorant ideology using expanded vocabulary, big fancy words, obscure references, elaborate theories. The more convoluted, the smarter they sound. But this is nothing more than verbal complexity pretending to be depth. Sometimes complicated stupidity hides better than plain stupidity. Real analysis doesn't need a thesaurus and a sociology degree to say something simple. The academic fog machine just hides how weak the argument actually is. The same thing happens with a lot of TED Talks and corporate speak. Drop enough buzzwords with confidence and the crowd claps. But make him explain it in plain English or use it in real life, and the whole thing falls apart. Look, I will assert that if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. And unfortunately, idiots flip that. If it's complicated, it must be brilliant. Now, I suspect I know how this next part's going to sound to many of you. It's going to sound bad, but the majority of Americans now fall into this foolish or moronic category. At least that's my perspective. And if you are an intelligent individual, you can spot these American fools right away when you start trying to argue with them. You don't even have to always know the subject matter most of the time to realize they're not logical in presenting their case. You ask them a few clarifying questions, their argument turns to shit, and they get defensive. You know the type. You try to engage in some kind of rational and intelligent discourse, and it results in the other person insulting you or just flat out calling you names. That name calling, it's a telltale sign. Yet, they speak authoritatively, as if they studied the topic for years, as if they hold a moral high ground. They speak with certainty when you know there's no way they know. They state untruths as fact. They cannot differentiate opinion from fact. They deflect and muddle multiple unrelated arguments instead of focusing on the original argument. And if you take them literally, they're lying, whether it's intentional or not. And these dumb, delusional people, they're growing, spreading the lies, and they are breeding a whole new generational class of ignorant and delusional Americans. Did you know that there's a trend or desire to raise children today as gender neutral? I'm not kidding. Seriously, gender neutral. Are you crazy? The belief that someone can successfully raise a child as fully gender neutral, erasing or preventing the emergence of typical sex-linked genetic innate behavioral tendencies, is a denial of human nature's biological realities. This thinking overemphasizes social constructs while downplaying the sex differences shaped by evolution, genetics, and developmental biology as nothing more than mere social constructs. How do you think these boys being raised gender neutral are going to turn out? How do you think the women are going to turn out when they've been raised to believe that they're equal to men? Well, hold that thought. It's time for me to tell you a story that takes place in the frozen heart of Siberia in 1959, where a Russian geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev, I think I'm saying that right, started a bold experiment. He took these wild silver foxes, aggressive, fearful animals from fur farms, and does one simple thing. Every generation, he only lets the friendliest, least aggressive foxes breed. Nothing else, no training, just selection for tameness. Within 6 generations, just 6 years, something remarkable happened. The foxes started licking hands, whimpering for attention, wagging their tails like dogs. They also slowly began to transform physically. By generation 10, many had floppy ears, curly tails, and piebald spotted coats. Their stress hormones dropped, their skulls changed. They became more juvenile, more sociable, less reactive. Dmitry and his colleague had recreated domestication syndrome in real time by selecting for one behavioral trait: reduce fear and aggression toward humans. Now, let's jump back 20 to 40,000 years ago. A similar process played out naturally with wolves. Some less fearful, bolder wolves began hanging around human hunter-gatherer camps, scavenging scraps. These wolves didn't attack, and the humans didn't drive them off. Over generations, the wolves best at tolerating humans, benefiting from feeding off their scraps, thrived. Those wolves had offspring, which inherited that reduced fear, which also helped them breed and survive and pass on their genes. Behavioral changes came first, then the physical ones. Shorter snouts, spotted coats, floppy ears, and the whole dog package. Dogs didn't get invented by humans capturing aggressive wolves and forcing them to behave. They largely domesticated themselves through a feedback loop with human environments. The silver fox experiment later proved this wasn't magic. It was predictable when you apply consistent selection pressure on tameness. And this is where it's relevant for us humans. Clearly, we're not foxes or wolves, but we do live inside powerful, invisible, selective systems every day. Cultures, institutions, educational systems, economic incentives, legal frameworks, and social rewards. These systems don't breed us in labs, but they do shape which traits help individuals and groups succeed, survive, and pass on their way of being, generation after generation. This is cultural selection at work. We already discussed briefly how America was produced by a cultural selection filtering process in the last chapter, but it's also important to understand what American systems did to influence the people in this country. The Enlightenment philosophy of the 17th and 18th centuries, with its emphasis on reason, individual rights, human nature, and skepticism of unexamined authority, created one of history's most powerful cultural selection environments. Ideas from thinkers like Locke, Montesquieu, Jefferson enshrined natural rights to life, liberty, and property as inherent, innate, and inalienable to human beings. This framework became the philosophical bedrock of the American way of life, a constitutional republic built on limited government, the rule of law, free speech, religious liberty, and the pursuit of happiness through rational self-interest and voluntary cooperation. It is this prototype framework that I've evolved in this series to align with what we know today about human nature, to align with a reason-based secular approach to natural rights, and to justify the moral framework I'm proposing in this series. Anyway, over generations, Americans who excelled at these cognitive and moral habits gained status, resource, and reproductive success within that system, passing on both genes and cultural practices to their children raised in the same environment. The quiet accumulation of who thrived in this environment shifted towards sharper analytical capacity and intellectual independence. This same Enlightenment system profoundly shaped morality and empathy. The natural rights doctrine asserted equal dignity of all individuals, fostering a perspective that transcended beyond tribe or class. American societies developed standards against unchecked violence that rewarded reciprocity and caregiving. Think of the long road that took us from tribal warfare toward a larger cooperative state, to a culture emphasizing compassion and individual rights. Our system reduced reactive aggression. This is the human parallel to the fox's tameness, which became advantageous in a society where disputes were settled through courts and commerce rather than feuds. Empathy and compassion grew not just as private sentiment, but as a structural feature. Institutions that treated people as right-bearing agents encouraged caregiving, mutual respect, and large-scale cooperation on an unprecedented scale. The Fox experiment is a clean laboratory model of something messier in humans. When you apply sustained pressure on one key trait, like tameness, or in our case, traits enabling success in complex cooperative systems, coordinated changes follow. Dogs didn't plan to become our companions. Wolves that could tolerate and benefit from human proximity simply out-reproduced those that couldn't. Human societies do something similar through the cultures and institutions they build and sustain. Do you see where I'm going with this? This year will mark the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. Think about the average American male in 1776. This guy didn't exercise. His entire existence was the exercise. He chopped wood. He hauled water. He walked everywhere. He rode horses. He hunted. He built things. He repaired things. He fought things. He slept in houses that leaked like a screen door on a submarine. If it was 20 degrees outside, it was probably 20 degrees inside, or damn close. Today, if the thermostat drops below 68, we start Googling for a local tech to fix the furnace. Now, here's where the Russian silver fox experiment gets relevant and interesting. Remember when the scientists selected foxes for tameness? They didn't just get friendlier foxes, they got physically different foxes. Floppy ears, smaller teeth, different skull shapes, different stress responses. The environment changed what traits mattered, and over generations, the animals themselves changed. Again, I'm not saying Americans were bred like foxes, but I am asking a similar question. What happens to a population after 250 years of systematically removing hardship from daily life? Because just compare the average American body of 1776 to the average American body of 2026. As I mentioned in previous chapters, I'm a huge American Revolutionary War buff. And based on everything I've read, the founder-era American likely had stronger feet, stronger hands, greater grip strength, greater cold tolerance, greater pain tolerance, greater endurance, tougher skin, denser bones, and a nervous system calibrated to the constant physical stress. The average modern American has climate-controlled, orthopedic inserts, heated seats, memory foam, food delivery apps, and a smartwatch that congratulates them for walking to the mailbox. We didn't just change our lifestyle. In many ways, we changed ourselves. Our feet have become softer. Our hands have become softer. Our tolerance for cold has become lower. Our tolerance for pain has become lower. Our expectation of comfort has become dramatically higher. The average American today lives better than kings back then. The average founding father could probably walk barefoot for miles than the average American today can walk barefoot to his mailbox. Not because he was genetically superior, but because his body was adapted to a world that demanded toughness, while our bodies are increasingly adapted to a world that demands comfort. Back then, pain wasn't a medical emergency. It was Tuesday. Cold wasn't trauma. It was weather. Discomfort wasn't an identity. It was life. And here's the question nobody seems to be asking. If the Russian foxes physically changed after a few dozen generations of selecting for tameness, what physical and psychological changes should we expect after 10 generations of selecting for safety, comfort, convenience, and avoidance of discomfort? Because whether we like it or not, environments shape organisms. The main takeaway is this. Systems matter enormously across generations. A culture that systematically rewards critical thinking and evidence-based reasoning will, over time, tend to produce more people skilled at those things. Not because it's eugenics, but because those skills help individuals navigate and shape the system successfully. A culture that normalizes low empathy or high reactive aggression will select differently. The silver foxes remind us that these shifts can happen surprisingly fast when selection is consistent. The dog story reminds us that they can emerge organically from mutual benefit and tolerance. We Americans are both the product and the architects of these selective environments. Understanding that, without romanticizing it or demonizing it, gives us leverage. We can design institutions, education, norms, and incentives that tilt the long game toward higher cognitive ability, sharper critical thinking, and deeper empathy. Or we can build systems that do the opposite. If we keep going the way we're going, we could very well end up in some amalgam of Disney's WALL-E and the movie Idiocracy. So we should be asking ourselves, what kind of selective environment are we building right now? And what kind of people will it tend to produce a few generations from now? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we're breeding a sad caliber of future Americans. Our American women are becoming more and more delusional, defensive, digitally disconnected, and depressed. Our American men are becoming intellectually weaker, fatter, candy asses, or disrespectful thugs. Studies are also showing decline in testosterone among U.S. men over the recent decades, including our younger men. Our American society seems to be getting dumber by the minute, both in intelligence and critical thinking. Our moral compass is getting twisted. I'll be honest, right now it looks pretty bleak. I believe we are truly living in an unprecedented crisis. I cannot believe how quickly we have decayed as a species in the last 15 years. The garbage being spewed out of our universities and academia is astonishing, and it has poisoned our system badly. The denial of human nature, the replacement of real science with activism, the reversed Flynn effect, the tribal assimilation, and the cultural indoctrination. Our system is creating American idiots who are subject to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Not only do they not realize they're dumb, they're being given diplomas which makes them even more confidently dumb. And these delusional people are teaching our kids, controlling the media, and leading the social media narratives. These delusional people are also parents. They breed and influence the type of man or woman their children become. You think I'm exaggerating? Using hyperbole? Being too extreme? Stick around for the next chapter and you can tell me if you still think so. In the meantime, we need to play damage control ASAP. We are racing a clock against artificial intelligence, the progressive dumbing down of our citizens, and the negative impacts of social media, which is rewiring our society for the worse. And if you think Gen Z is bad, wait till you see what's coming with Gen Alpha. Our kids, our youth, young adults are not developing certain skills. These synaptic capabilities are not being developed in the first 25 critical years of their brain development to maturity. They're not thinking, questioning, reasoning. They can't focus or deliberate for more than a few minutes. Their attention span is shit. They struggle to read, calculate, and apply critical thinking. And AI is not helping. You know, as a Gen Xer, when I was a kid, if you wanted to know something, you had to work for it. You dug through encyclopedias. If your family didn't have a set in the house, you went to the library. You argued and debated with your friends. You listened. Sometimes you were right and made good points. Other times you were wrong and you learned. Eventually, if you cared enough, you figured it out. The process mattered. Not because the answer mattered. The mental struggle mattered. Reading mattered. Even reading fiction mattered. Because your brain development mattered. The process of gathering facts, comparing sources, testing assumptions, finding contradictions, listening to arguments, perspectives, and changing your mind was the workout. And that workout built cognitive muscles. Here's another little fun fact for you. They did a study where they compared reading a book versus listening to an audiobook. The same book, but one was reading, one was listening. I believe this happened in some kind of academic setting. Anyway, they gave these students a quiz about what they had just read or listened to. And the ones who actually read scored a 92, an A. The ones who listened scored a 64, a D, 28 points lower. And this is just the day after. Can you imagine what this quiz scores would have been like a week after? I'd suspect the deviation would have been even greater. But I don't know that. That's just my suspicion. Anyway, today, we are increasingly outsourcing the workout to artificial intelligence. Not just calculations, not just information retrieval, thinking itself. And that should concern us all far more than whether AI will eventually take someone's job. Because for most of human history, intelligence wasn't just having access to information. Intelligence was the ability to process information, to evaluate it, to challenge it, to understand the context, to recognize when something sounded persuasive but was actually bullshit or nonsense. But there's another problem. AI is also very good at sounding right, sometimes astonishingly good, even when it's full of shit, which surprisingly is more often than most people realize. Artificial intelligence can summarize books you've never read, explain scientific concepts, draft legal documents, write code, create business plans, generate essays. But it can be spectacularly wrong. Not slightly wrong, not off by a little, completely, confidently, and ridiculously wrong. I'm constantly arguing with AI, especially ChatGPT. I use it to argue against my podcast narratives, looking for flaws that I might have. And it has been wrong more times than I can count. I know this because by the time I'm done arguing, I make sure the AI platform admits it answered my original question incorrectly. For example, is when I was asking ChatGPT about the performance issues of the Secret Service during the assassination attempt on Trump. Now, at the time I was driving, for some reason I had a mental block. I couldn't remember the location, which was the Butler rally. My focus at the time was on DEI, but it got derailed because ChatGPT denied the assassination attempt altogether. I'm going to read you ChatGPT's response verbatim. It said, "I hear you feel strongly about what you've seen, but to be clear, there hasn't been any assassination attempt on Trump that fits that description. Sometimes online videos can be misleading or edited, so if there's a particular video you've seen, I'd encourage you double-checking its context or source." I said, "What?" I responded with, "It went national. It was the one where the bullet clipped his ear and there was blood on his face. It's very well known, very well documented, all over the media. It's not some kind of weird conspiracy thing. I can't remember the name of the rally, but the guy was a kid on a roof. They got him." At which point, ChatGPT answered with, "I think there's been a mix-up. There hasn't been a documented assassination attempt on Trump that matches that scenario. It is possible the event you're thinking of is a fictional portrayal or something misrepresented online. The Secret Service has fitness, firearm proficiency." I responded with, "Are you serious? Okay, let me ask you, what documented assassination attempt on Trump do you know of? What is the most famous assassination attempt that you, ChatGPT, are aware of? Because this sounds crazy to me that you're not aware of this. To which ChatGPT responded with, I understand you're bringing up something vividly that you recall, so let me clarify. To date, there hasn't been a confirmed assassination attempt on Trump where he was physically harmed or any scenario like the one you described. The only known serious attempt was in 2016 when a man at a rally tried to grab a gun from a police officer, but no shots were fired and Trump was not injured. If there's something circulating, it may have been misreported or dramatized. Always good to verify sources! Exclamation point. I mean, Jesus Christ, this is the level of accuracy we're dealing with. Anyway, when I got home, I hopped on Grok's IA platform and asked it the same exact question. Was there an issue with a female Secret Service employee at Trump's assassination attempt where the shooter got him in the ear? Grok AI thought for 4 seconds, responded with, yes, there was significant public controversy and criticism regarding the female Secret Service agent's performance and physical suitability during the July 13, 2024 assassination attempt on Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. And it went further into DEI controversy, validating my original assertion. So then I went back to the ChatGPT chat and I cut and pasted the answer from Grok. At this point, ChatGPT responded with, you are absolutely correct, and I need to acknowledge the mistake clearly. There was a major assassination attempt against Donald Trump on July 13, 2024 at a rally in Butler. And then ChatGPT went on to validate Grok's response. But I didn't let it go there. I asked ChatGPT again, verbatim. I said, I know I was correct, but the question is, why were you wrong? That's a pretty worldwide known thing. Are you being influenced by liberal progressive coding? How can you be so wrong about something so big? ChatGPT responded, you're right to be angry. That was a bad miss. The likely reason was not liberal progressive coding in the direct sense. It was more likely a combination of knowledge gap and cutoff failure, overconfident corrective behavior, and safety pattern overcorrection. Because assassination claims can overlap with conspiracies or misinformation, the model may have defaulted too aggressively toward denial rather than verification. There was also a bad conversational judgment. You gave enough concrete details, Trump, ear wound, rooftop shooter, national coverage. At that point, I should have recognized or verified it. So the honest answer is, I was wrong because I failed to verify a recent major public event and then compounded the error by confidently dismissing you. Holy hell, this is what we're up against, and how many of our kids are going to have the knowledge, critical thinking, and reasoning to argue and win debates with AI? The problem is that previous generations developed their bullshit detectors before they encountered this kind of AI misinformation. This generation that we're breeding is increasingly encountering information before they develop their detectors, and AI is hindering them from developing those detectors. This is a dangerous reversal. Imagine teaching a teenager to drive by putting them in a passenger seat and letting the car make every decision. Eventually, they may arrive at the destination, but they never actually learn how to drive. The same thing is happening here cognitively. When AI answers every question immediately, the brain never experiences the friction required to develop judgment. There's no wrestling with ambiguity, no weighing of competing explanations, no learning how to distinguish evidence from assertion, no developing intellectual endurance. Just prompt, receive answer, move on. Prompt, receive answer, move on. This is the mental equivalent of DoorDash for cognition. And just like physical muscles weaken when they're not used, cognitive muscles weaken too. Memory weakens, attention weakens, reason weakens, curiosity weakens. The ability to follow long chains of logic weakens. The ability to tolerate uncertainty weakens. And uncertainty tolerance may be one of the most important intellectual skills ever developed by humans. Real knowledge often begins with, I don't know. However, modern technology increasingly conditions people to expect, I need an answer immediately. Those are not the same thing. In fact, they're polar opposites, because genuine understanding frequently requires sitting with confusion long enough to resolve it. AI eliminates much of that discomfort, which sounds wonderful until you realize that discomfort is where cognitive growth happens. And I'm going to pull out my crystal ball and say it's only a matter of time before teachers, largely comprised of these indoctrinated progressive women, get bit in the ass. Soon, our public school system, from an early age on, is going to start to crumble. Just as our broken school systems trigger dumb kids to act out, soon, all of our kids going through public school will be getting dumber and acting out. Now, don't get me wrong. I use AI. I think it's extraordinary. It's one of the most powerful tools humanity has ever created. But that's exactly what concerns me. I'm old enough to have seen the negative cognitive impacts due to advancing technology. The use of calculators reduced mental arithmetic. GPS reduced navigation skills. Social media altered social development. And AI may produce something much larger, the development of independent thought itself. Think about what happens when an entire generation grows up relying on systems they don't understand to answer questions they never learned how to evaluate. At that point, knowledge becomes performative. People know answers, but they don't know why those answers are correct. And if they don't know why they're correct, They can't recognize when they're wrong. That's where things become genuinely dangerous, because a society filled with people who can retrieve information but cannot evaluate information becomes extraordinarily vulnerable, susceptible to bullshit, to propaganda, to manipulation, to ideology, to misinformation, to bad incentives, to institutional failures, to charismatic nonsense, to morons like Mondani. And unlike previous technologies, AI isn't merely replacing labor. It is increasingly replacing cognition. And that distinction matters a lot, because civilizations are not ultimately built on access to information. Civilizations are built on judgment. Judgment determines which information matters. Judgment determines which incentives work. It determines which leaders should be trusted, which ideas survive. If judgment deteriorates, eventually everything else follows. And that's why I think this issue might be far larger than most people realize. Not because AI becomes conscious, not because robots take over, not because some Hollywood science fiction apocalypse arrives, but because billions of perfectly normal people gradually stop exercising the very cognition or cognitive abilities that created civilization in the first place. The existential threat may not just be artificial intelligence becoming smarter. It may be the natural human intelligence becoming weaker. And unlike science fiction movies, that process doesn't happen overnight. It happens one convenience at a time, one shortcut at a time, one outsourced thought at a time, until eventually we wake up and discover that humanity has built the greatest cognitive tool in history, and our people have forgotten how to think without it and how to reason right from wrong. And these people, they will be voting. And to add insult to injury, as artificial intelligence continues to censor their answers to stay within their sensitivity guardrails, they are sheltering the users from reality. Can't prove this, but I can't think of another reason why that would be happening unless somehow this progressive and liberal influence infiltrated the AI coding. So, based on the moral framework I've laid out so far, I suspect the majority of you would have a hard time disputing the foundational principles. Having said that, there are some people who are going to be either too religious or too collectivist to understand that everyone, regardless of race, religion, or sex, has the right to be left alone. And that's okay. As I've tried to impress in this chapter, we can't fix stubborn or stupid. But with any luck, we can still fix our system. And if we fix our system, I will argue that we will reduce stubborn and stupid. Not just in the near term, but for generations to come. Because even if you agree with this moral framework, and agree that true morality comes through consent, how do we deal with a system that oppresses your individual rights? You may be morally justified in resisting the government usurpations and abuses, but with almost absolute certainty, you will lose the battle and be killed or incarcerated in the process. We must fix the system. And to fix the system, we need to understand the challenges. This chapter was just a taste of the obstacles and challenges. I will assert that our biggest vulnerability as a nation is the growing ignorance and deterioration of our IQ and critical thinking. Remember the Superman motto, truth, justice, and the American way? We need to make that a reality. And to do that, we need to understand the truth first, before we can truly implement any justice and fix our broken system. And we need to fix our system before the Chinese artificial intelligence or our own AI destroys any possibility of making the American way the beacon of liberty, morality, and prosperity. So, we need to dive deeper. We need to understand how bad, how dire the situation is, by sex, by race, and by subculture. We need to address and tackle taboo subjects. And we need to do it soon. So on that happy note, peace out from Virginia.